Hello students, this is Dennis. I'm going to review how and the reason why we should create a design tool. So why and the how of a design tool. I'm going to start by assuming I have the specifications as you see here. Write a short program that will create a paycheck stub for an hourly employee who gets paid every Friday. Make sure you abide by all federal and state laws. You can assume the employee is full-time. You can assume that the employee pays federal tax at a fixed rate of 28%. You can assume that employee pays Social Security tax at a fixed rate of 7.5%. You can also assume those are the only deductions or taxes, the 28 and the 7.5%. You are to calculate and then display the employee's regular pay, overtime pay, gross pay, federal tax amount, Social Security tax amount, and net pay. Also, you output the employee's name, hourly wage, and hours worked. If you don't know what the federal laws are, you would have to research or ask the client. So there's the specs for the program. So the next question is, what would you do next? So I would probably want to go to what I'm going to call an IPO chart. And notice I am in Microsoft Excel, just to show you an example of a tool that could be used to do this. So I am inside of Excel, and an IPO chart is nothing more than I for the input of the program, P for the process of the program, and O for the output. And notice I started here with the output as an example. The name, the hourly rate, the hours worked. How much, if you worked this many hours, would your regular pay be, and so on. So now I would say to myself, okay, what does the input for this program look like? What would the input for this program look like? And that answer is pretty simple. I'm going to input their first name, and that'll be a string or a char, their hourly rate, and followed by the hours they worked. So these are the three inputs from the user. I like to separate my inputs from the user with a line, and then I look at all the other variables that the program might require. And I'm going to need a place to store regular pay, overtime pay, gross pay, federal tax, Social Security tax, and net pay. And here I go. As I said, I need a placeholder for each of these. Notice how this output that I started with was used to drive my input. I'm going to also have two constants called Fed tax rate and Social Security tax rate. So this is my input. This is from the user. And this is variables I would use in this program. So my process, how do I get from here to here? How do I get from the input to the output is my process. And basically I would start by doing two simple calculations. I would test to see if the hours that the employee worked was greater than 40. If so, then I would compute reg pay and overtime pay as follows. I would give them credit for the 40 hours of regular time, and then I would give them credit for anything above the 40 hours at time and a half. Why? Because that's the federal law. That's how overtime is calculated. Then I would, if this is not true, that means they didn't work overtime, so I'd be down in this part or the otherwise or else part. And it's pretty safe to say regular pay is just their hourly rate times hours worked. And if I get down into the else part, that means their hours were less than or equal to 40, meaning they have no overtime. They have no overtime. So I'd be done with the three inputs from over here. I'll just maybe highlight those in yellow. So I'm done with that. And then I would be done with calculating reg pay and overtime pay because I did that right here. So what's next would be these four items, and notice my output is also driving my process. So the next thing I would do would be to calculate gross pay. So gross pay is nothing more than regular pay plus overtime pay, so I would be done with that and I can mark it off. Then I need to calculate federal tax and Social Security tax, and that would be as simple as this. Fed tax equals gross pay times Fed tax gets gross pay times federal tax rate. Social Security tax gets gross pay times Social Security tax rate, and net pay gets gross pay net pay is gross pay minus the taxes. So I did the federal tax, I did the Social Security tax, and the net pay. So basically I have highlighted or crossed off everything. So this IPO chart is complete. I believe I could take this simple input, process, output chart and code this in C or whatever programming language. Doing this same thing, the same specs, not as an IPO but as pseudocode, what's my process, or how do I do it? Well, I get the input from the user, and the input would be their input would be their name, their hourly rate, and the number of hours they worked. So I get that. I test to see if the hours is greater than 40. If so, this is how I calculate reg pay and overtime pay. Notice it's real similar to this IPO chart. If this is not true, I calculate reg pay and overtime pay as follows. And then after that, I compute the gross pay, federal tax, Social Security tax, net pay, and then I display the output. That would be pseudocode. Now, flowchart. A flowchart is a little harder to write in Excel. So to do a flowchart, you might wish to use a program such as Visio, or you can possibly go into Google and say, hey Google, what is a good free flowchart program? And it says the best flowchart software of 2008 is that guy, but that's not the one I like. I like this guy right here. Flowchart Maker and Online Diagram. This is completely free of charge. Basically no install. Just click on the URL and you will be in something that looks like that. It looks like that. Or this. So this would be my flow chart, and it takes a little while, and you will have to use these shapes over here to the left to make your drawing. But I'm taking my IPO or my pseudocode and I say, hey, this program starts right here at start, because start's a pretty good place to begin. Out of start, I come down here and I get the person's name, how much they make an hour, and how many hours they work. I leave this box, come down here, and I do this test. If their hours worked is greater than 40, if that's true, this is how I calculate regular pay, and this is how I calculate overtime pay. If this is false, which means they did not work overtime, this is how I calculate regular pay, and obviously there would be no overtime pay. I join back up after the if statement, back here, and I calculate my gross pay. After my gross pay, I calculate my taxes. There's my federal tax, my Social Security tax, and my net pay. After I have everything calculated, I display the output as shown, and I stop. That would be a flow chart. And what I did is I just cut and pasted that right into this Excel spreadsheet. So there's my pseudocode, there's my flow chart, there's my IPO chart, and there's my program specs. Finally, I created something called a structure chart. And a structure chart is very similar to a flow chart, but it just kind of contains the kind of the flow, but more like a structure of the program. So I do this and this, then I do one of these things, then I do these two things, and this last. I can have more detail here, but usually a structure chart is used when you're making functions, and each rectangle would represent an individual function. Go for my specs. I can choose an IPO. I can choose pseudocode. I can choose a flow chart or a structure chart or a hybrid of any of these. Okay, I think 9 minutes is plenty of time. I'm going to stop this video. If you have any questions, email or call.